Sarah Tacoma is from Kimberley, the area here that you're in, and she's an herbalist, and I think you're going to find her talk very informative. What we plan to do is Sarah will give you a small talk, and then we'll take questions from everyone. I'm sure you're all eager to find out what all of these bottles are for and how best to use them. Anyway, without any more delay, this is Sarah Tacoma.
Thank you very much for having me. Okay, so thank you for coming to my talk on herbs and health. I'll start by telling you a little bit about myself. So I wasn't always a herbalist. I only started my business actually in 2020, but I have been, I think, forever a herbalist. As a kid, I would spend a lot of time outside playing with plants and collecting seed pods and doing all that kind of thing. And I was fortunate enough to have a mother who was really open-minded to alternative medicine. So when I was a kid, we would go to the doctor and she would say, I don't like that opinion, they're wrong, which was great. And so we would also go to a naturopath and we would go to a homeopath, and she always did muscle testing on us when we were kids, and I thought that was totally normal. So I don't know if you know muscle testing, but you would hold out your arm and someone would press on your arm and then you'd hold something in your hand and you didn't know what, it was in a bottle, or you had to close your eyes and then push on your arm again. And if your arm went down, that means you were sensitive to that thing. So my mom was always like, put out your arm, put out your arm. So I did grow up with a bit of an alternative approach to medicine, although not really knowing that at the time. And then I remember I even found an old journal from when I was a kid, when I was about 12, that said that I wanted to make potions for people to make them feel better. So that was always kind of in the back of my mind. And then when I discovered what herbalism was, I had just finished college. I just finished art college and was starting my career as an artist. And I thought, oh no. But yeah, when I discovered herbalism, I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to study this on the side, and then eventually I'll transfer careers. So I started studying first with the Living Centre in London, Ontario. I did a correspondence course through them and through Sage Mountain, which is in the States. Eventually I went to Wild Rose Herb College, which I'm still at now, getting my master's of herbalism there. And I was also really fortunate when I was living in Toronto. I met my husband and I moved out to the country with him to this tiny little town, not much bigger than Kimberley. And I met three other herbalists living in that town. One was a practicing herbalist, one had just finished school and was starting to build her business, and one was just like a family kind of community herbalist. And all three of them took me under their wing and let me ask 1,000 questions and tag along when they were foraging. And so one of those women runs the Ginkgo Tree, which is a herb school, and Faunus Herbs, which is a really big herbal manufacturing company, because a lot of these companies that make herbal tinctures, they don't necessarily want to be making them themselves. They want to make the recipes, and so they send the recipe to Faunus, and Faunus grows the herbs and makes the product. So I spent a lot of time on that herb farm. I've also been to several conferences over the years. They're all kind of listed there. A lot of them are annual conferences. And then I started Bloom Botanicals officially in 2020. I started another herbal company, I think in the mid-2000s, before I started studying herbalism. But it was all essential oils, bath bombs, that kind of thing. But that was my start to herbalism. So when we moved to Kimberley, I had already been studying herbalism for quite a while and was planning on starting a business eventually, and I had already been making a lot of products and selling them at little farmers markets and things. But here I actually had room to grow. So our lawn, we had like a full acre in front of our house that was just grass. It was just like mowed, flat grass. So we built really big gardens, vegetable gardens and herb gardens. And what was wonderful is when you're learning about herbs, you can get those dried herbs and you can work with them, and that's fun, and they smell good and they taste good. But when you're growing them, or when you're witnessing them growing and you see them through the season, it's a completely different experience. So what I loved is I ordered all these seeds to grow, and I'm growing them in my greenhouse and I'm putting them out to my garden. And as they're growing, I'm like, wait a minute, I actually recognize this herb. It grows right over there in those bushes. Or one, I painstakingly started this whole flat of what's called self-heal. And then I realized that a huge part of my lawn was covered in it. I'm like, oh, okay, that's what that was. And St. John's wort, which I had worked with for a long time, but never in its like whole plant form, I started growing it from seed. And I knew that St. John's wort, its name is Hypericum perforatum. And perforatum refers to the little leaves that have little perforated holes in them. And as I saw it growing and I noticed the perforated leaves, I recognized it growing at the side of my property. And I went over and I saw the little perforated leaves. And then Hypericum also, or St. John's wort, its name is based on hypericin. The Hypericum is hypericin. So the little yellow flower, when you crush it in your fingers, it turns your fingers like a bright red, a little bit purple. Like it's just really cool, and you don't expect that. So I went over and tested it, and indeed, it had the perforated leaves, and my fingers turned purple. And I was like, St. John's wort in the wild. So growing things from seed was really like a wonderful experience, and really getting to know the herbs on a deeper level. Then I started teaching workshops. I didn't quite realize how much information I had. I thought, oh, I'm studying this. It's not quite like a full-on business yet. But you accumulate knowledge over years, and I've been studying this for about 15 years. So I started running workshops and realized I had a lot more information than I first thought I did. And so that was really exciting. And it was, that's okay, come on in. And it was great to teach people kind of just like the basics of just like immune system support or first aid, and just witnessing their faces light up when they realize, oh my goodness, that thing that's growing all over the grass, I can use this. I can use this to help with like a bee sting, or when I have the flu, or to help my child when they're in pain. So that was very exciting, and that's, I think, one of my favorite parts about working with plants is witnessing people kind of wake up to the possibilities at their own fingertips. Because I think as much as I love that we have modern medicine, I think in the process of modern medicine, we have a lot of us given over our health and the responsibility of our health over to the system. And I think that there's a lot of that we can take back. Like the first line of defense is with us, right? So if we know some basics like, hey, I have a cold coming on, or I see my kids with runny noses, what can I do now to stop it from getting worse? Or, hey, there's a fever, what can I do to help this fever so it does its job without getting too high? Or what can I do? I've actually broken a bone, I've gone to the hospital, I'm now in a cast, but what can I do to speed up this healing and repair damaged nerves so that the whole process goes a lot smoother? There are so many things we can do, and giving a little bit of information to people in like bite-sized amounts, like I'm going to try to do with you today, is really empowering. So I'm going to try not to give you too much information because it can be overwhelming. Another great thing about learning herbs is witnessing my children. So I've got 3 kids, twin girls and a boy, and it's hilarious watching them now because they're teaching their friends. My oldest, he's in an outdoor education school, and my girls I homeschool. But watching them with their friends, and they're like, oh, well, just do this, just use this. And my daughter, the one in the middle here, she stepped on a bee a couple years ago, and I couldn't help but laugh because she screamed plantain, which is the name of the plant you want to use. It's a drying agent. It pulls toxins from the body, it soothes inflammation, and it eases pain. Like, it's the #1 herb you would use for a bee sting, and I just loved that she screamed this. And so her twin went and ran and got the plantain, and then my son ran and got yarrow. He's like, I think yarrow's going to help too because it's antiseptic. I'm like, darn tootin' it is. So that was good. So what can we use plants for? What can we not use plants for is really the question. I'm going to touch on a few of them. So we can use herbs to help with muscle cramping, to ease pain and inflammation, to support the immune system, to manage stress and anxiety. I was just talking to my neighbor the other day who's a doctor, and she said that in the family practice, easily 30% of the people who come in with anxiety. That's the driving concern. And that's unbelievable. We have so many herbs we can use to help either in an acute situation to ease anxiety, or kind of like more like for chronic anxiety, where you can actually increase your tolerance for stress over time. So we have so many herbal allies we can be using. We can also use herbs to support digestion, to provide energy, and the energy is either through like vitamins and minerals, or it's through an increase in circulation throughout the body. We can use herbs to balance hormones, to flush toxins, to aid in sleep, and to support healthy balance of bacteria in the body, among many other things. So even bacterial infections, something that's been happening more and more is that people get these bacterial infections and they go on rounds of antibiotics, and then it comes back again a few months later and another round of antibiotics, and again and again and again, and this isn't good. We don't want to be using antibiotics in that way. Thank goodness we have them, but we don't want to be relying on them repeatedly like that. But what often is the case is that it's actually a bacteria that normally lives in us in a healthy way when it's in a good ratio to the other bacteria in our body. But when we are under stress, or we've eaten poorly, we've disturbed the mucus lining in our systems, that bacteria can get out of whack and that balance goes off. And then that one bacteria that was benign, it's like just this calm little bacteria hanging out there, all of a sudden it rears its nasty head and creates a problem. So we can work with herbs to bring back that healthy mucus lining and to kind of calm that whole imbalance. So we're going to play a little game. I want to know if any of you can spot or know what this plant is. Nettle, yeah, fellow gardener knows it right away. So stinging nettle, I actually have it right over here. I set this one on top so that I wouldn't sting myself. It looks a little sad. So this is stinging nettle. You can touch it without getting stung if you hold the stem. Okay, it's in the mint family, so it has a square stem when you roll it between your fingers, and the leaves come out at the same spot on either side. Okay, the leaves do have little hairs on them, and if you touch them, it does sting. Some people react more than others. But if you know what bee sting therapy, right? So people are using bee sting therapy, bee venom therapy, more and more because it helps to ease pain and inflammation, arthritis, joint pain, muscle pain, all kinds of stuff like that. But stinging nettle, the acid on the hairs is very similar to the acid in bee venom. So often what was done was, I'll try it. I don't know how bad it's going to hurt. It's fine. No, it's okay. Sometimes it really hurts when I do that. But they would take fresh nettle and they would run it over their hand where they had arthritis, or over a sore joint or a bad back, and it brings blood right to the surface and helps to ease that inflammation. It brings all this oxygen. It's really, really healing. Now you can also get blisters from that, but then there's often plants around you like plantain, calendula, that will help ease that blister reaction. So my kids actually, they love to play a game where they run their hands through the patch of nettle. They tease each other, or it's like that truth or dare kind of thing, and they run their arms through, and then they scream wildly, and then they run and get calendula and rub the calendula on their arms. So we know it's not that bad if they can handle it. So stinging nettle, it's really high in minerals, vitamins, including A, C, D, iron, sulfur, and vitamin K. It supports healthy bladder and urinary tract, supports adrenals, calms histamine response, which is kind of hilarious because it also causes a histamine response when you run your hand through it. But if you drink the tea of it, it works as an antihistamine. Mm-hmm. So people who are having hives, like a hive reaction or something like that, they could have like a stinging nettle infusion, and that's going to help calm that histamine response. You can also take it as a tincture. So yeah, this is a great one. And this also restores energy through it stimulates blood circulation, and it helps to build blood in the system, and it's also providing all those vitamins and minerals, so it can really boost energy if someone's feeling really low and drained, especially after the winter. So they say this is a great spring tonic herb because it grows up in the spring. You don't want to be using this come like August. You don't want to be harvesting it really in August. You want to harvest those early spring herbs. Okay, now next one. Does anyone know this one? Yes.
Did you say you don't want to harvest the late nettle leaves for tea?
No, you don't want to harvest it late because there is, I think it's an alkaloid that gets too high in the plant. So if you're cutting it back, like if you're cutting it in the spring and you're using all those spring tops and then it flushes again, you can continue cutting it, that's fine. But if you let it grow and it's been sitting there, then these alkaloids build too high. And then you can have some, it's not gonna hurt you, but if you were having this as a medicine and you were drinking multiple cups a day, you wouldn't wanna do that because that could damage your kidneys.
So we're getting to the end of spring.
You can still harvest it now, yeah.
Okay, but not in August.
I would stop, yeah, like mid-July to August, yeah. There's some great nettle patches along the river, and there's also an Ontario woodland nettle, which looks very, it looks different, but it's like got these big round leaves with a jagged edge. I found it because I was walking through looking for elder bushes, and my legs were suddenly on fire because I didn't recognize the plant I was walking through, and I got covered in blisters, and I was like, what is this? And then discovered Ontario woodland nettle. So does anybody notice or recognize this plant? No? Okay, this grows all over the place. It's called motherwort. Leonaris cardiaca. Really good for the heart. It says so right in the name, lion-hearted. That's what it means. So with this one, you want to harvest it once it's gone to flower. But this is a wonderful herb. This nourishes the nervous system and eases pent-up emotion, including overwhelm and anxiety. This is a great one if you have kind of like persistent anxiety, overwhelm. It also works for acute anxiety. So if you're suddenly nervous about something, this is a nice one to just have in your pocket that you can take like as a tincture. You don't want to take this as a tea. You can, it's not going to hurt you. It's very, very bitter. Does not taste good as a tea, unless you like really, really bitter things. It also relaxes the muscles, so all the muscles in the body, the smooth muscles, the skeletal muscles, the muscle of the heart, the muscle of the womb. This is really great for all the muscles. So it helps like relax those muscles and ease the nervous system, because it's a nervous system supporting herb. It calms a racing heart and aids in sleep. So if you're one of those people who gets anxiety that comes with a racing heart, this is a great one specifically for that. Because it's so bitter, it supports digestion. So bitter herbs and bitter foods, they stimulate like a secretion of bile, right? That's going to help you break down your food better. And it helps to balance hormones. This is a great female herb. It's good for men too, but especially like, so it's wort means herb, so mother herb. This was great for young moms, right? Big changes, huge hormone fluctuations, overwhelm. You know, they're tense. They need some support. This is like a warm hug for a new mom or anyone going through anxiety or anyone with like a bit of a racing heart for sure, or heart issues. So long as you're not on blood pressure medication already. I wouldn't take this if you're on blood pressure medication. Okay, and this one all of you should know. And I hope all of you love it. Yes. So I feel like if our yards were covered in any other beautiful yellow flower, we would be like, yay, look at how pretty my lawn is. But for some reason, this particular flower, nobody wants to see all over their lawn, but it's one of the best medicines. So dandelion, you can use the entire plant, root, leaf, stem, flower. It's incredible. So this supports the liver in flushing toxins. It stimulates the production of digestive juices because it's bitter. It supports the growth and maintenance of healthy gut bacteria, the root specifically, because it's full of all kinds of wonderful starches and inulin that help feed the good gut bacteria that will last down to the large intestine where it's going to feed that good colony. It promotes hormone balance. It's really, really rich in minerals. The flowers ease pain. So I like to gather the flowers, dry them, infuse them in oil, and use that as a pain salve. And the entire plant, again, is edible and medicinal. So this is a really, really powerful herb. Yeah?
But, I've eaten the leaves before, but never the root. How would you eat the root?
So you dig it up and you can roast it. So now there's like coffee alternatives that are made primarily of dandelion root and chicory root roasted, like dried and roasted. I would dig it out in the fall, preferably. For young girls who are like first getting their cycle, I would say they should use the spring Doug herb. But for everybody else, the fall Doug herb is the best. And it's up to, I think, like 30% inulin, which is incredible for the digestive system in the fall. Yeah, you just dig it up, rinse it off, split it because it's really thick. So you want to split it, let it dry, or roast it, I guess, and then dry it. Yeah. So you can even get like Dandy Blend. It's like that alternative coffee blend. That's mostly dandelion. Okay, what's this one? Pine, that's right. So this is a white pine? I think this is a white pine. I was looking through pictures. It looks like a white pine, right? 5 needles, that's right. So white pine is identifiable by its clusters of 5 needles. Now all the pines have similar medicinal benefits, but the white pine is our local, like, strongest medicine. So white pine is really powerful. So it fights infection, viral and bacterial. It's incredible. It's warming to the body. Most herbs are actually cooling to the body. So there's a whole area of herbalism you can get into that's called energetics, and it's about whether like maybe 2 people are suffering from the same thing, but one person runs hot and one person runs cold. You're going to give them different herbs. Right? One person is a little more like damp, like they're sweaty, and they're just like more moist. They're like oily skin, and the other one's really dry. You're going to give them different herbs. One's really high energy, and one's a lot more relaxed and sedated. So these are these different energetics of herbs that's important to know, especially if you're working with people in a clinical setting. But it's good to know that white pine is warming. So if you had a cold or flu in the wintertime, or someone is having a cold or flu and they're running cold, this is a great one for them because it warms the whole system from the inside. The needles are really rich in vitamin C. White pine eases inflammation and it lowers blood pressure. So say you weren't on blood pressure medication, but you're getting to the point where you might be, this can be an alternative you can try before jumping into pharmaceuticals if you wanted to do that. But I wouldn't take this if you were already on blood pressure medication because it's going to double up. But yeah, white pine is so antibacterial that the pine bark, especially from the Scotch pine, it used to be taken and used by indigenous cultures both here and in the UK to carry dairy products and meat products. They would keep it in these like folded envelopes of the bark because it was so good at preserving things because it was so antibacterial. So if the system collapses and you have a cow, you can make milk and cheese, no problem. Okay, who knows what this is?
Elderberry.
Elderberry, that's right. So this grows all over the place here too. It really likes wet soil, so you can find it mostly like in lowlands, marshes, by the edges of the riverbank. Most people know it for its berry specifically, but its flower is also just as medicinal. So both flower and the berries are antiviral. Now what's great about elderberry and flower is the way that they attack a virus is that they destroy the outer sheath, the protective sheath of the virus cell, which makes it impossible for that virus to attach to something else and then multiply. So so you can take this tonically because it is a tonic. It's not an immune stimulant. This one's really safe to take every single day in a small dose every day. But if you felt a cold coming on, you could just take it 3 or 4 times in a small amount throughout the day for 4 days. And it's going to get rid of that outer sheath lining on all of the cells of the virus, and it like shocks that virus so that it can't multiply, so it can only live in you for a few days. Now the studies on this are unbelievable. Now with herbs, some of the herbs have not been studied a lot because there's not a lot of money in running a study on a plant that you can't patent, right? Like pharmaceutical studies are really about, putting money into something where you can get money back. Herbs you can't patent, so there's not a ton of studies on all the herbs that I work with. But this one, there is. So I value anecdotal evidence just as much as scientific evidence because there isn't the science available to do certain studies, right? Or there isn't the science available because there hasn't been studies done. But with elder, there have been a ton of studies and they're unbelievable. Really, really cool. I think it was something like 80% of people who took elderberry extract 3 times a day for 3 days reduced their flu symptoms by a massive percentage. I can't remember the numbers right now, but it was dramatic. I remember copying this out of this study I read, and like, put this on my website. Yeah, this is a wonderful one. So it's an immune tonic again, not an immune stimulant. So an immune stimulant like echinacea, you don't necessarily want to use every day all the time. It's too stimulating, especially if you have any kind of autoimmune condition. It can really trigger an autoimmune reaction. But this one is nice and gentle, so you can take it every day. The flowers are antiseptic and anti-inflammatory and a gentle laxative. Flowers also help ease the appearance of wrinkles and uneven skin tones, so they're used a lot in like beauty products and have been for centuries. And the leaves ease bruising and swelling and would be applied as a poultice, so where you like chop it up or chew it up and apply it to a bruise. That's going to really help with the bruising. And elder flowers have long been used to make cordials, like really tasty alcoholic or non-alcoholic beverages. It has a very unique flavor. Okay, I'm not going to go into detail, a whole bunch of details on the rest of them because I don't want to overwhelm you, but I do have several plants here we can just take a quick look at. So this is a mint. So again, the nettle is in the mint family. It has a square stem, and the leaves come out right at the same spot on either side. So same with this, right? You can see mints all have the leaves coming out at the same spot, and they have that square stem. So when you roll it in your fingers, you'll feel it. You'll know that it's a mint plant. It's in the mint family. But mints in general, there's all kinds of wild mints growing around here. Ben Fiddlehead, we talk about like the mints that we find and we've nicknamed them because there's just so many bizarre varieties that we've never come across anywhere else. But mints all help with digestion and they increase like blood circulation through the body. So they're wonderful and they're very safe to use. This one's plantain, this big broad leaf in the front. And it sends up those like skinny stems with an odd little flower head on the top. So this is, there's actually 2 plantains growing in here. I can see like 2 different varieties, I believe. There's a broad leaf that lays low, and then there's a narrow leaf variety that grows up tall. But both of them are wonderful. Anti-inflammatory, pain relieving, they draw out toxins. They're mucilaginous, which means they nourish the mucous membranes in your body. They also are demulcent, which means that they soothe the skin. They're hydrating and moistening on the skin. So both internal and externally moistening. That's like the #1 herb I teach in my herbal first aid. Rose. So a dog rose, a rugosa rose, or a cultivated rose. All of them are medicinal. All of them. They're all in the apple family. So it's a 5-petaled flower. And as long as they're fragrant, they are medicinal. So if you have cultivated roses, you can put those in your tea, right? Even if they're not fragrant, you can still use them. They're just not as medicinal. And then the hips, the rose hips are super medicinal. They're jam-packed with vitamin C, just like sumac. Sumac that we see growing along the side of the road with those red cones. You want the red ones, the white ones are poisonous. The red ones are not. It's pretty easy to tell the difference. But those red cones have little berries on them, and those are really, really high in vitamin C too. So great for immune support. And rose, by the way, is also great for an emotional support. So when you're working with herbs, you also open yourself up to that possibility of working with emotions as much as physical ailments. And rose really helps with the heart and with the lungs, with moving emotions through. So we hold grief in our lungs, right? So a lot of people, I've had people come up to me and say like, oh, I have I think I might have long COVID, I don't know what it is, this persistent cough. I was talking to this woman recently, and in our conversation, she ends up revealing that her husband had passed last year, suddenly, and that her cough developed right after that. And I was like, oh, like it could be long COVID, and we can work on supporting that, but it can also be grief, right? So in traditional Chinese medicine, lungs are absolutely where you hold grief. So we've been working with her on that, and she's noticing a shift. So I would give her rose, or any other heart and lung supportive, like emotionally supportive herbs, hawthorn, mullein, sweet violet. All of those help move emotions out of the lungs and heart.
So when you say you give her all of that, you can create a serum with all of
Yes, so
as opposed to each individual item?
yeah, so I didn't make her one with all of those in it, but like those are kind of the options you can use. So if it's something that's emotional, I would give them a tincture or a tea, but I might also give them a flower essence. Because flower essences are kind of like homeopathic remedies where they work very subtly, they're very, very diluted. And it works more on that emotional level. But I've combined them too. So if I know someone has an emotional issue, I might give them a tincture and I'll add a flower essence to it as well. But yeah, you can combine. And there's all these different theories on how to best formulate. So I have like a specific kind of formulation ratio I follow about using like your primary herb, and then you have something that supports it in a certain percentage, and then you have a little bit of a stimulant that helps to drive those other ones where they need to go in their body, you know? But you can really combine what you want to, yeah.
Could you just describe a little bit what you mean by a tincture and
Yes.
how you make it and how it differs from a tea, for example, or what you...
Yeah, so tinctures are alcohol extracts of a plant. So they're traditionally like just an alcohol extract. Now that word tincture does get used a little more loosely to also describe an apple cider vinegar extract, or a flower essence, or a vegetable glycerin extract. So it's essentially a liquid extract that's quite potent, that you would take drops at a time. So anywhere from like 3 drops to 40 drops, depending on what it was, what the herb was and what the issue was. So I do have some tinctures here. Actually, I have motherwort here because I don't like public speaking. It gives me anxiety. So I was like, I'm gonna have some motherwort tincture before. So this is an alcohol extract. So some of them are really dark, some of them are light. They have each one has its own smell. It smells like a plant. So what I would do is take that plant, and I make fresh plant tinctures. A lot of herbalists will make dry plant tinctures. I prefer to use fresh because I feel like there's something to that live plant that you can't get out of a dry plant. And when I've purchased dry plant material from people, and I compare it to if I had a little bit left at home and I was like, oh, I want more of this, and I order it, the quality is so different. Like that could have been sitting on their shelf for 3 years, whereas I throw out all of my herbs after 1 year. I don't keep anything longer than a year because it loses its potency. So I would take that fresh plant and I would finely chop it and put it in a jar and cover it with alcohol. You want at least 40%. So your final product needs to be at least 20% alcohol to be shelf stable. So vodka, brandy, any of those is good. You pour that on top and you let it sit for 10 to 12 weeks. And then you strain it off and use it. So if you wanted to make tinctures, you can get those little jam jars. Like, because you're talking about drops, you're not going to need more than a jam jar for probably your entire life unless you have like a major chronic issue. So you can get lots of little jam jars and do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and tincture them individually. You could blend them as you needed them. Yeah. So then I'll do an apple cider vinegar extract as well when I'm working with certain herbs that I know they get extracted better into apple cider vinegar. Or I'll use like vegetable glycerin if it's for my kids, right? So when my kids were younger, now they take the alcohol one. But when my kids were really little, I did a vegetable glycerin one because it's sweet. So it's like a sweet syrup. And so it's really easy for little kids to take. And you would just give them a couple drops. Yeah. Any other questions about tinctures?
How do you control the strength, the potency of it?
Yeah, so I measure. I don't measure the I can't really measure the potency. I could have mine sent off to a lab for testing, but I don't. Mine are pretty consistent. So there are certain rules about like ratios. So it's like the weight of the material by the number of milliliters you use. It's like 1 to 2 usually is the ratio. Yeah, but then with fresh plant, it changes, right? So this is why a lot of herbalists will use dry plant to make tinctures, because it makes it easier to monitor the, to be consistent and to monitor the potency. Yeah. Any other questions about tinctures? Okay. Yeah.
A handbook or something, what would you recommend for studying the various plants?
Yeah, I did bring a few books that you can look at.
Okay.
These are from my own collection. I have a very large book collection. And I live just through the woods here, about like 400 meters. So it's not a far walk if you want to sign a book out of my little library at home. But yeah, there are some great ones, like the Patterson Field Guides. They're a pretty common field guide, and they do make a medicinal, like I think it's like maybe Ontario medicinal field guide. And so they give, they'll run down like how you identify it, what it's known for, any contraindications, stuff like that. So my rule of thumb is if you're going to harvest something in the wild, you need to check in 3 different ways that it is the plant that you think it is. So you would check, are the leaves coming out of the same place, or are they alternating? What is the shape and color of the flower? What does it smell like? What's the shape of the stem? Is it square? Is it round? Is it fuzzy? Is it smooth? Even the root, like sometimes you would dig out a root if you were not sure and check the root. Is it a certain color or a certain smell? You need to check at least 3 things before you use that plant. That's my rule of thumb. So I've had people come to workshops, and then I had this one woman call me and she said, I think I'm allergic to yarrow. And I'm like, allergic to yarrow? That's such an odd plant to be allergic to. I'm like, okay, cool. And it's like, you know what? Can you just send me a picture of the plant that you tinctured? And so she sent me a picture. It was not yarrow. It was a poisonous plant. Yeah. She completely just, missed the mark on identification. Yeah.
I use a lot of that plant ID when I'm out foraging and things like. Do you find that those are accurate enough, or should you still do that 3 steps sort of
I still do the 3 steps because I'll still use those plant ID apps because I'll come across things if I haven't seen them at that stage of growth before, or it's like a different variety or something where I'm like, what is that? I've never seen that before in my life. Like I'll use those plant ID apps, but I will not rely on them. So I'll check across like 3 different apps, and then I have books with me. So when I go foraging, I have books with me, and then I'll cross-reference. And if I'm still not sure, I'll take a sample, I'll put it in an envelope or a little baggie, bring it home, and check my books at home. Because I have come across things before where I'm like, I think this might be poison oak, and it doesn't quite look like it, but and you're not quite sure. I'm like, I don't want to be grabbing that. So I actually just took a picture of that one and then went home and looked through all my books. It was like a different form of jewelweed. But yeah, it looked awfully like poison oak. And the apps were wrong. They gave me something totally different. Yeah. But those apps are really great as a starting point. So if you had no idea what family that plant was in, you could use that app and be like, oh, okay, I'm going to check that family of plants and see if it's something from there. Yeah. So this one is valerian. That's in my bouquet over there. It's the tall one with the white flowers. So valerian's used a lot, mostly for the root, for its sedating qualities. So people who have sleep issues will often try valerian, but I find valerian doesn't work very well on its own. It can. But it works way better when it's combined with hops. So hops is a vine that grows with these really resinous green flowers. It's what beer is made out of. It's part of the reason beer makes you sleepy. But hops and valerian, when they're combined together, they're super powerful at helping to calm racing thoughts and calm the body and bring on sleep. But valerian, it's mostly the root that's used. I love using the flower. So I use both. But I use the flower more than the root. I find it's gentler but still potent enough. And then you're not digging up the plant.
Just another observation.
Yeah.
It's blooming right now in my garden, right?
It's blooming right now.
Right now in
Yes.
my garden. Today, really,
I know, so mine was just
and what it's sort of unruly in garden.
It's very unruly. It does spread by seed. So you want
The smell is just sensational. It's a cross between sort of cinnamon and it's quite delightfully sweet, spicy.
it's
That's why I
sweet,
love it.
spicy. I totally agree. The root, which is I would love it if you all took a whiff of the root. It's not so much sweet spicy. I don't know how I put this nicely. It's really grounding, and some people really love it. I've learned to love it. When I first smelled it, it was like a hockey day. Like old gym shorts and socks, but also like a pleasant muskiness. For some reason, I like the smell. I'm not too sure why. But yeah, the flowers can smell pretty potent, and sometimes in the summer when I'm doing herb walks through my garden and the flowers are in like full bloom, some people are like, what is that smell? And other people are like, oh, what is that smell? So it's really on an individual basis. This is self-heal. So this is the one that I had started a bunch of seeds of and then realized my lawn was full of it. So it can grow really low to the ground. It can also grow, I've seen it like 12 to 14 inches, like the edge of like walkways. Not walkways, but self-heal. Yeah, Prunella vulgaris. So this one is incredible. It's one of the most studied medicinal herbs we have. It's really anti-mutagenic, right? Anti-cancer. It prevents the mutation of cells, and it helps to stop mutation of cells when they start happening. So it is both astringent and moistening. It speeds up healing in the body. If you have something that's just persistent, that's not healing, like a wound that's just not healing, this is a great one. This is one I recommend to people like post-surgery, right? It just does such a good job at speeding up healing. It's in the mint family as well. You can see there's leaves that come out at the same spot, and it has that square stem. Really safe. You can eat this as a food. It doesn't have a lot of taste. You can chop it up into your salad. You can have it as a tincture or a tea. You can dry it really easily. I get big drying racks, like just on Amazon. I think they were actually made as like cannabis drying racks originally. But there's like these huge round mesh racks, and they just hang from anywhere. And I'll just fill them up with these, like they dry so easily. And you throw them in a jar after, and make tea with them regularly.
You use the whole plant?
Yeah, you can use the whole aerial part. So not the roots, but you can take everything from the top. Yeah.
The name again?
Self-heal. Yeah. I would actually look at like Prunella vulgaris, or just look at Prunella. Because there are other herbs. There's so many different folk names to herbs. And there's other herbs that are named heal all. And that can get confused with self-heal. Yeah. Yeah. So some people call this heal all, but I know that's actually the name for another one. I don't know. They all have such different folk names. I don't have yarrow in here, but yarrow, one of its folk names is soldier wort or wound wort, battle wort, because it can be packed into an open wound and it will stop the bleeding. It's also incredibly antibacterial, antimicrobial, antiseptic, in this word. So really great in battle. You could take the whole plant and you could just pack the wound with it, and it will really quickly stop bleeding in battle, and also fevers and everything. Yes, question?
Is it also called Kimberley?
No, that's something else.
That's a juga.
Yeah.
Use a juga.
Yeah, that's right. And but it looks kind of similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that pop-up flower for sure. Yeah. But yeah, the folk names, I love looking at folk names because they can really tell you a lot about that herb and its use. What are some of the other ones? I have written some down. So like comfrey, which I also brought, the cultivated variety of comfrey specifically. So it's one that's not a wild comfrey. Comfrey has a really bad rap, actually, in Western medicine because it was banned in 2011, I think, because there are two wild varieties that have a really, their alkaloids are really high, they're like a damaging alkaloid that would really severely hurt your liver and kidneys if you consumed a large amount of it. You would have to consume quite a bit, But Health Canada banned its use across Canada. You couldn't sell any products containing comfrey of any kind. And you can sell the plant as like a garden plant, but not for any kind of medicinal reason, topical or internal. But then the Herbalist Association fought against Health Canada and showed that there's only these two kind of wild varieties that contain those dangerous levels of alkaloids. The cultivated varieties are fine. You can consume them internally, but there was so much scare there that there's still a lot of, you can't find comfrey tea in the health food store. I drink comfrey tea all the time, but there's so much scare around it. And I think in North America, it's a lot more, people are a lot more worried about liability. So if you look at like all my European herbal books, like they'll list all the things. They're like totally edible, no contraindications, like use that. And then all the North American ones are like, whoa, may contain dangerous levels of this and this and this. So it's just a very different approach, a different mindset. But comfrey, the cultivated variety, you can absolutely use it internally or externally. And its folk name is knit bone. So I was just talking earlier about my dad who broke his pelvis while hiking up here a couple years ago. And I put him on comfrey infusions. And my mom put him on St. John's wort, the homeopathic version, which is hypericum, and which helps to heal damaged nerves. Okay, so he's on homeopathic for damaged nerves. I put him on the comfrey infusions for his bone repair. And the doctor was astounded at, like, he was back to normal in 5 weeks. Totally fine after having a completely destroyed pelvis. So, yeah, it's like looking through these folk names will tell you a lot. And then finally, culinary herbs. So I tell people, like, we're all herbalists. If you have a spice drawer, spice cupboard, you're a herbalist. You're using them already, so just use them more. And make sure when you're using them that they're still fragrant. If you open up your rosemary and there's not much of a smell, like, throw that in the compost. Get some better stuff, get some fresher stuff, and use it, and recognize that you're using it as medicine. Most of the herbs in our spice drawer are really antiviral, antibacterial. They really help with the flu. A lot of them are very warming, like sage, rosemary, thyme, oregano. As soon as my kids are sick, sage tea with some honey, and then I'll make a really strong pot using all those culinary herbs, and I'll add it to a foot bath. And so a hot foot bath will stimulate the lymph better than exercise. Okay? And the lymph is moving all these toxins through your body. It's flushing them out. You want to stimulate that lymph, you can do it with a hot foot bath, and you add your herbs in there, a strong herb tea, and you're absorbing that right through your skin. So it's a great way of using herbs. And then just using them in your food all the time. So just recognize that you can be addressing your health right from your herb cabinet. And yeah, so the ways that you can use them, teas or nourishing infusions. Nourishing infusions are like long infused teas, tinctures, salves, which are topical ointments, poultices and compresses. So a poultice is when you chop up that herb finely and you put it right on the wound. A compress is when you make a really strong tea and you put a cloth in it and use that cloth. So say the wound is open and you don't want bits of herbs in it, you use that cloth and press that on. You can use herbs as food. You can take them in capsules, flower essences, or homeopathic remedies.
What about syrups? Friend of mine made dandelion syrup.
Syrups are a great way of using herbs. You are bringing a lot of sugar that way too. If you're doing a sugar-based syrup, if you're doing it with honey or maple syrup, it's a little bit better. But yeah, syrups are great. I make flower syrups and other herbal syrups in the summer and use that as juice for the kids. So we'll just do a little bit of syrup and then I put some sparkling water in it, and we'll make popsicles that way too. A syrup with some water and put the popsicle molds. Throw in like a mint leaf. And I think that is it. I don't want to give you too much information, but I'm happy to continue talking about herbs if you have any questions. Yes?
With the white pine, do you just chew on the needles? Or
Yeah,
is
you
the bark?
could chew on the needles. I would take the needles and the stem. So when you're cutting off the needles, you don't want to just leave that twig, like that branch, kind of dead at the end. So I cut right at the base, like where that stem meets the main branch, and then I cut the whole branch and the needles, and I would simmer that on the stove for 10 minutes. add a clove in there or a stick of cinnamon or like a cardamom pod, good to go.
How do you, everyone uses their cereals, how clean is it?
Well, if you don't see any bird food on it, I think it's good. Yeah.
I just think about rain days.
Oh, yeah. So you can definitely like just rinse it in some water. Yeah. Yeah. I only, like I wouldn't harvest right after, like rains that came right after a toxic fire, for instance, right?
Or you're not smoking.
That's what I mean now, with the smoke from that fire. Yeah. So I'm careful about when I harvest, and like what time of day. So you don't want it, if you're going to be drying a plant, you don't want to harvest it in the morning when it's still kind of, it's got a little dew on it.
Maybe porous.
Well, they'd be damp.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to harvest it like more at noon, right? So the sun's come out, it's dried up a little bit, but it hasn't lost a bunch of oils. Because by the middle of the afternoon, it's lost a bunch again. Yeah.
How do you keep the shelf life of your things so that they don't like go moldy or things like that? Because I've been doing like a whole bunch of stuff lately, and some things are okay, so I'm kind of doing an experiment, right, with different ways of trying to store them.
Yeah, so are you talking dried herbs?
Dry, yeah, mainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like even dandelions, I was trying to work with those, but they were turning brown so quickly, and it was like this.
Well, dandelions,
And
yeah, when you harvest a dandelion flower, as it dries, it can sometimes turn into like a puffball, right?
yeah, and some of them did.
And that's fine, they're
Yeah.
still medicinal, you can still
Okay.
use them. But you want to make sure that you're drying your plants out of the sun,
Right.
and there should be some air motion, so wind, like a little bit of a fan.
I have one of those circular things that I
Yeah.
control everything.
Yeah, so that should be good. And if it's going brown, I would say run a dehumidifier or dry them in a
And
dehydrator.
then just throw them in a jar.
Store them in a jar, but be careful. Like even I've been storing herbs for years, and I will dry something, and I don't want to dry stuff until it's like powdery dry.
Right.
I want to dry it until it's kind of cured, like it's dry, but it's not like fully like dead looking, right? But then sometimes there's a little too much moisture, and I go to get something out of that jar, and I smell it, and I always make sure I smell it before I take anything out. And sometimes I can smell a little bit of fermentation, and so then I have to check it.
Yeah, like I keep the lids off until I know what's
Yeah.
happening, keep shaking them.
Yeah.
Try to get the air through
Yeah,
it
that's a good
and things
idea.
like that, but like bourbons and things like that, like how can I keep those fresh?
I would just put them in the freezer then. Yeah, or put them in a dehydrator.
Okay.
Yeah, with fur tips, I would just put those in the freezer. And then if you're making infused oils, I sterilize everything. So I have a certified kitchen, so everything gets sterilized anyways. But then before I use anything, I use isopropyl alcohol and spritz everything down and wipe it down, everything I'm using, so that there's no bacteria going into that product. And so they have a pretty good shelf life, but I don't use any preservatives, and so everything does have a best before date. And so I'm upfront about that with my products, and I list that right on there. But a lot of people are looking for products that don't have preservatives, right? Because preservatives, no matter how small, they are still a toxin in the body. So if you have an autoimmune condition.
And what is it, you said you keep yours for a year, that's the dried herbs?
Dried herbs, yeah.
So, and then that's like the max that you would.
That's the max, because for using them for myself, I could keep them longer. But if I'm making a product with herbs that are already a year old, by the time my customer is using them or my client is using them, it could be like 18 months to 2 years. But for myself, I would keep them up to 2 years and roots 3 years. That's kind of the rule of thumb.
A question about quantities. I kept thinking, before I dig up all the dandelions out of my yard, how do you know how much? Like, is there a recipe book that says, 3 dandelion roots plus this equals that? For certain things?
That's one of those things where you just kind of have to see how much you're going to go through and how much you need. But yeah, don't, if you dig up too much, that's not in your dandelions. But if you're making tinctures, you don't need a lot of plant, because you probably don't need a lot of tincture. But roots are going to take up more room in a jar, right? So you want to take up more than what you think you need.
So you said about the white pine, you said one branch, I'm thinking in my mind, okay, I don't need 10 branches stewing on the stove, just one branch.
Oh yeah, or like one pot of tea. Yeah, just one swivelly little branch, yeah.
Do you see people as fire? How many people are identified?
Oh yeah, you can, I have a website, people can book through my website. Yeah. And I also have a shop, right, so there's, the sign hasn't been out much lately because we're doing some renovations, but usually it's open at least one day a weekend. If you see the sign, you can drive up. Yeah.
With traditional medicines, I don't really use any because I'm super paranoid about taking different things. But anyway, the mixing and matching that doctors need to do now, you get this for that, and then you pay for this, and now you pay for this, and then you have this whole cocktail of drugs going through your system. Is there a risk with these more natural things? Like, okay, I'm used to deep sleep, but I also have this anxiety issue these days, and I put those two together, and then, oh my goodness, I've got this antiseptic need. Can I put that one on top of that, or is there a point to it in your body that it's like, no?
So there's different schools of thought on this, but in general, if you're going to be taking more than one formula, well, even like more than two, like I would take 2 formulas together, no problem. If it's more than that, I space them out. So I take certain, so I have my tinctures beside my water filter, and then I have certain tinctures I take in the morning, and then I'll take another one in the afternoon. And I have like a little shot glass beside my water filter, and I just put a little bit of water, and I put my tinctures in there, and shoot them back. So I just space them out.
And you're saying 2 to 3 or
Yeah, 2 to
Maybe
3
that many, though.
is really fine. But there are these different schools of thought about blending. So the Eastern practice of herbalism will take, like, okay, say you have a broken leg, right? You've got some broken bone in your leg. They'll give you all these herbs for healing broken bones, skin cell, regeneration, nerve damage, inflammation, pain, all these things. They'll put them all together knowing that some combination of them is going to work for you. Western philosophy is more about what's called like a single herb. Actually, I can't remember the term they use now. But there's a certain term that they use for like a single herb at a time, and you try one at a time so you know which one is working for you, and then you can start blending from there. I don't really think it matters, whatever you're drawn to. If you have the time to weigh it out, like I also feel like if something in that 50 herb bundle works for you, it works, it's great. You don't necessarily need to know. For some people, they won't really want to know. And then also, if you are on medication, you do need to know which herbs you can take with those medications. So there's certain herbs you can't take when you're on specific medications, like St. John's wort you can't take internally for antidepressants, because the St. John's wort flushes it from your body too quickly for it to take effect. So yeah, you gotta be careful if you're combining those two things together. But like deep sleep, for instance, that's gonna help with nervous system regulation as well. So some of those things, like you might have more than one issue you come with, but you can have one product that actually works for both of them. Yeah.
But something like, if you take melatonin, how do you know that whether you can take some herbal,
So you can look it up. There's plenty of guides online, like official guides that will tell you which medications you can combine with which herbs. So you just want to make sure you're using the Latin name. So if you know the common name, you can just look up the Latin name.
yeah, I just wondered if it becomes trickier perhaps when it's not a prescription medication.
Oh, no, most of those medications are available online. Most of those medications are like available on that list, even if it's not prescription based. Yeah, but melatonin, that's also a really easy fix. As long as your body produces melatonin, there's a really small percentage of the population that doesn't, their bodies don't produce melatonin. But for everybody else, it's when you wake up in the morning, getting your eyes looking right at the sun as it's first coming up. It's that low light. You need at least 5 minutes in your eyes, and that's going to determine the melatonin you produce that night. It's also going to determine how much vitamin D you can absorb during the day. So having that coffee outside, looking at the sun is critical.
That's a good thing to do.
It's a really good thing to do. Like sun gazing in the middle of the day, no, but That early morning or late evening, looking at the sun, like just as it starts going down and just as it's coming up, that's really, really healthy to do. And we have to remember our glasses, they're UV filtered, so we have to take off our glasses, right? Our windows are UV filtered. So UV is like, you know, it's this big, nasty, dirty word, but we actually need it. The sun has been a little overly demonized, in my opinion. We need actually more of it, but just at the right time of day.
Do you do anything with rhubarb?
I bake a lot with rhubarb.
But it has medicinal qualities.
It probably does, but I haven't looked it up too much. I know it's in a couple of my books, but I haven't looked deeply into it. Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's kind of fascinating. So what I've found in the herbal community is that a lot of us, when we're studying herbs, and I found this to be very true for myself, when I'm studying herbs, certain ones just jump out and they just, boom, it's like downloading in my brain, almost like I'm remembering versus learning. And then other ones, no matter how much I study them, I cannot for the life of me remember. I can't work with those herbs because they're just not sticking in my mind. And so what we've noticed is that a lot of us who are feeling this way, we're drawn to the herbs from where our ancestors came, right? So I'm drawn a lot to the herbs that came over from Europe, those seeds that were sown into the hems of skirts to be brought over as medicine to the New World, right? The cells of my body are used to, familiar with those medicines because those are the medicines of my people for that long. Whereas like some of the indigenous herbalists I've worked with here, they're like, oh yeah, I can never remember anything about plantain because it's not from here. Plantain is brought over. And so they're like, oh, I just want to stick. Yeah.
Sarah, thank you first of all for a great presentation and for making Kimberley your home. I'm wondering whether you have seen any positive change in the degree to which medical doctors see herbalism and herbalists as partners in both the prevention of illness, maintenance of health, and the treatment of disorders. Has there been any positive change in that from your perspective?
I have seen it a little bit. I think that there is a growing awareness, for sure. It's not necessarily like generational either, though. It doesn't seem to, it kind of goes across all generations. But I think it's the doctors who have recognized that there's certain situations where they haven't been able to help a patient, and no matter what they do, they can't quite figure it out. And then that patient goes to see someone else, goes to see a naturopath or an herbalist or whatever, and they actually, something is resolved. And they witness it firsthand, and they don't shut it down, and they're like, okay, there's something here. So I feel like that must be the common thread. I know, my mother even, she had an experience in the hospital where she took arnica, which is a homeopathic remedy for trauma, like for physical or emotional trauma. So she took it after surgery for breast cancer, and the doctor was like astounded at her rate of healing. It was just like, wow, like, I don't even know how you're healing so fast. Like, the tissues are just, he was just blown away. And she wanted to say that she had been taking arnica, but the nurse caught her eye and did a little head shake. And she was like, huh? And then the doctor left the room and she said, you're taking arnica, aren't you? Knew the exact remedy my mom was taking, and I said, yes. And she said, great, keep taking it, but don't tell this doctor. Because no matter what you say, like, he'll just block it out. But that's not true for all, right? So there is greater awareness, and I think it's on like a person-to-person basis, based on their own personal experience. So I do hope that it's growing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks. I can actually, there's a local doctor, Erica, she and I have been talking about creating a pamphlet together. That was like a first aid pamphlet on like herbal remedies and from the perspective of a doctor on how to handle some healthcare issues at home to ease the load on the medical system.
Well, thanks everybody, and thanks to Sarah for giving us this talk.